Martinson,
Here.
John Heberleff,
Here.
and Kurt Wolhuter.
Here.
Okay, at this time, please join me for the voluntary pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. There are no minutes for approval at this time. Excuse me. Okay, so the public hearing this morning or this afternoon is for the Tamco Inc. appeal of the borough manager's denial of protest to the borough's notice of intent to award the North Harbor reconstruction project to Western Dock and Barge. I will now go through the process that we're going to be using through this appeal hearing. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm rushing things. Any agenda amendments?
I would like to make one. That's why I suggested it.
And where would you like it?
I would like it under board discussion. It's a letter, it's a resolution from the Sea Alaska Heritage Institute.
Okay, 16B.
16B, yes. Thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
Sorry to miss that. Okay. Back to the process to be used for this appeal hearing. We don't have any.
Oh, no, just amend the amendments.
Oh,
Okay, sorry.
thank you. So,
Somehow I became the
thank you.
parliamentarian.
Well, we need it. This is my first meeting as mayor, so we need all the help we can get here. So, is there an emotion to approve the agenda as amended?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay. The agenda is amended. Okay. The process to be used for this appeal hearing, it has been scheduled as required by the Petersburg Borough Code number 4.04.100. The hearing will be recorded. Except as described below, the hearing will be conducted in public session. The hearing will not be a general forum for public opinion on the bid award. Both Tamco and the borough may call witnesses. Testimony of only those witnesses who are knowledgeable about North Harbor project bid process will be taken. Testimony and argument will be limited to the legal and factual grounds for appeal raised in Tamco's protest and written appeal. All witnesses will be sworn under oath. However, there will be no direct examination nor cross-examination of witnesses as in a formal court proceeding. They may simply come to the podium and give their testimony. Formal rules of evidence do not apply, but as chair I do reserve the right to disallow evidence I deem unreliable, such as hearsay. Witnesses may be questioned by assembly members, but will not be cross-examined by counsel of either the borough or Tamco. Borough counsel will be present via teleconference to listen to testimony and argument. However, borough counsel will not engage in examination of witnesses for either side. At the conclusion of the testimony, Tamco and the borough representative will be allowed a reasonable time to present a final argument. Thereafter, unless the assembly seeks an executive session to consult with borough counsel concerning the issues on appeal, the assembly will proceed with motion matters to decide the appeal. Following the decision, the assembly will work with borough counsel to prepare findings of fact and conclusions of law, which shall constitute the formal decision under the Borough Code section 4.04.100, section E. So, at this point, we're ready for Tamco Inc.'s presentation. And before you start, Mr. Martinson, we'll get you sworn in.
Raise your right hand. You do affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do. Okay, Jim Martinson, VP Tamco. I guess first thing I just want to take a real deep breath because there's a lot of stuff involved in this whole thing. especially when we get into talking about being consistent with state statute and state procurement. I mean, they have a whole division up there, and Juneau, that's all they deal in is everything the state spends money on, they do it. And it's a lot to ask, and of you guys to understand, or even myself to understand the whole thing. But I'm going to do my best to present my case and let you do what you want with it. First off, I'd just like to say that protests and bids this size are not uncommon. This is our third project in a row in this range financially, and all three of them have come down to a protest or, clarification what's going on. It's just the nature of the beast. It's not me stomping my feet or anything like that. It's just there's a limited number of these contracts out there. It's like I was going to let's say a fish. You got one fish that's going to make your whole season. One boat's going to catch it. It's there. It's competitive. Thus, competitive bid. I guess you can take that. So, other thing I want to do is let's clear the table as far as being under constraints of time. The state, in projects we've done, if there's constraints of time as far as we got someone coming in to do dredging or something, that doesn't pertain to this. This is just law. We just got to look at what the law says. We can't say we're under a lot of pressure. We got to get this done. We got to go. That's and we have projects that we've bid in the past that have fallen under that same type of stuff. So I want to just kind of clear that up as far as my perspective. So when it comes down to it, state statute is very black and white. They're laws, and we've got to try to follow them. The history of this kind of protest for me, and I'll mention it several times, is this past fall, Skagway had a similar situation that they brought into effect local bidder preference. And basically, I don't know if you guys have followed it at all or looked into it at all, but basically they went ahead and bid a job with federal money involved. Bids came in, they found out that, oh, we can take the federal money out. We got state and local money. We can then apply local bidder preference, which they did. Western Marine, not Western Dock and Bridge, Western Marine now out of Seattle, protested that bid and the bid process and took it all the way to Superior State Court. Basically, the conclusion came out of that there's nothing the Superior Court could have done funding-wise. They did say you can protest this based on changing parameters of bid because it was bid under the pretense that there was no bidder preference, but then they jerked it at the end to reevaluate their bids, and so that they changed the bid documents on them. So they said you can do that, and they ended up settling out of court basically because they didn't want to take it to Supreme Court and tie the whole thing up for the whole winter, basically is what it comes down to. But so that's what got me thinking. And so I got a hold of the city and asked them, well, was there any federal money involved? And my answer that I got was no. So that's what started this whole process of me trying to figure out what's going on. So funding is the basis of this whole appeal or protest, I guess. And I don't know, I sent this out late. I don't know. I know Cindy got it, but just basically outlining what I've found about when we talk about state funding with strings attached. I wanted to know what are those strings? What are your parameters? Because we've always, for the last 20 years, said, well, there's strings attached, we can't do it. But I wanted to know what those strings were. So, from the city, I got your transfer project agreement. I don't know if you guys got that in your packets or not. But basically, on item 10, it says municipality contracts with third-party contractors for planning such and such. There's a list of things there. Basically, it says you got to be consistent with state procurement principles or code, law, however you want to interpret that. So we got that. So what's consistent mean? It doesn't mean exact in my mind, and this is where we started this whole process. Well, so if it doesn't mean exact, what does it mean? It means similar to. It means in the same kind of feeling of what their intent is. So we got into that, and if you want to if you don't have that, you can readily get it. But that's basically the strings attached to this funding are right here in the transfer project agreement. So if we're going to be consistent with state procurement law, then we got to go in and basically look at what state procurement law is. And that's where it gets kind of tricky because, you know, we're trying to just work within our codes and try to understand our own codes, which sometimes we fail to do. Now we're expected to understand what state statute and state law says about this similar kinds of things. So it really kind of complicates it in my view for me and you and everyone. And I don't think that was the state's intent, to get it confusing enough where you as a body have to know state law. Just in the same reference, when the state gets federal money, they're not expected to know all the federal laws. They're just supposed to have something similar in statute to pull it off. So I'm going to take my deep breath now, because once I get going, and if I talk too fast, just raise a hand or ask a question. I encourage you to ask questions in this, because once I get going, sometimes I can't stop myself. So we got this, the basically funding saying we got these strings attached to state statute, state procurement. So now let's go look. To me, I had to go and say, well, what is preference? Why is it there? Why is it complicating our life? And just a brief note, it stemmed from the Alaska pipeline back in the 70s, when the state saw all this money hemorrhaging out to Texas and Oklahoma and that. So they took their first stab at Alaska bidder preference. And I talked to the head of Southeast at the State Department, who's just about for procurement, who's retiring next month. So he's been there for 30 years. He was there when it happened. And he said they failed miserably the first time. Constitutionally, they took it to the Supreme Court, got tossed out. So the state came back, rewrote the law to basically say geographically and economically, Alaska is a place where we feel we can invoke or apply these bidder preferences. So they worded it constitutionally that it can be upheld all the way up to the federal Supreme Court. So that's what the state did. So what's all the municipalities and stuff, basically, if you look at the codes and statutes, they're very, very similar. It's like, you know, we took what they did and brought it down to the local bidder preference. So we got the same type of wording, same type of purpose of it. So in short, ours is constitutionally the same as the state. So constitutionally, if this goes to the state level, state Supreme Court can't do anything about it. If we take it to the federal Supreme Court, there's nothing the feds can do, because it's already been constitutionally proven to upheld. So that's how the preference came into effect. So now we got to get into the strings attached basically to this money. If you go into state procurement law, which we got to be consistent with, if there's no outside funding, whether it be federal or international, about the only two other things they can do, then preference has to be applied. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. If it's state money, preference is there. Same thing in our city codes. If the funding will allow it, preference will be applied. There are a couple loopholes that we'll try to jump through, but the basic premises, and I can quote them for you, or if you want to look them up, but in basically Code 4.04050, Section A says if residents will be given the 5%. I'll get into some other things as far as the loopholes if you want to go down there, but that's the basic premises. So you got state, local, basically the same on paper, consistent with each other, and Skagway has already proved that because of that wording, you can apply it. These are things you can fact check. I've fact checked them as much as I can. I got copies of all the statutes in here. I know Cindy's got them there because I emailed them. I don't know if any of you checked your email this morning, but they're there for you to look at. So if we're sitting here now, state has basically told you have to have a preference to meet your funding. Whether it be Alaska bidder preference or local bidder preference, you have to have a funding. If not, you're not consistent with the state procurement law, because they say you have to. That's just the way that they do business. They want to support local companies, state companies. They want to keep business in the state of Alaska. That's why Alaska bidder preference came. Local bidder preference, same thing, lower scale. And if you go into state statute, you will not, I can't find, maybe if you could, it would be your way to get off, but there's nothing in there that says you can't be more restrictive. It just says you got to be consistent. So it's all in how you figure consistent. If you think that is consistent, then you're in your legal rights to do it. There's nothing in there that says if state money is involved, you have to use Alaska bidder preference. It just says you have to use preference consistent to state statute. So we're going along now. We'll have to diverge a little. We know whether there's got to be funding there, or you're going to jeopardize your funding, and some preference there, or you jeopardize your funding. Now, Alaska bidder preference is very clear on how it's applied. Alaska Statute 363010 says in the invitation to bid that you have to clarify and basically all the parameters surrounding. So if you're going to use Alaska bidder preference, it's got to say it in the invitation to bid. And I fact checked this with the state design department, with the head of procurement, and just in the last 30-something years, every state job we've had that has Alaska bidder preference, either big bold letters, Alaska bidder preference will be applied, or if you look in your bid tabulation sheet, at the very end it'll say 5% Alaska products credit or whatever. So you know that when that bid's added up, they're going to apply that 5%. It's cut and dry. And both bodies that I talked to agreed, yes, if we're going to put out a bid with Alaska bidder preference, we got to be upfront about it, because we got people from Washington, wherever, bidding on these projects. They got to know that preference is there. Then 363015, bid evaluation is kind of the same thing. You cannot evaluate a bid without it being parameters based on like Alaska bidder preference, without it being in the invitation. So basically you can't come after the fact and say, well, we're going to apply Alaska bidder preference now. Well, no, you can't, because it wasn't in the invitation in the original bid documents. So the Alaska bidder preference is pretty clear on the procedure we got to follow to actually apply the bidder preference. So if I'm going down the right side of my chart and see that this wasn't in this document, bid documents, it wasn't in there, then I know that, okay, Alaska bidder preference can't really come into play. We can't come in post bid and say, well, for all intents and purposes, all people involved were Alaska companies, or the low bidder was Alaska company, you're Alaska company. Bidder preference wouldn't have made a difference. Well, it does make a difference, because the destination isn't the important thing. It was the journey we went to get there. We can't break laws to come to a conclusion. It just doesn't work. So if Alaska bidder preference isn't in the table, and we got to have some preference, the only thing you got left is your local bidder preference. Now, the nice thing about this one is your document here, that your bid documents, will actually defer to city code and standard and specifications. So if it's not in here and it's questionable, we got to go to the code book, get out the code book, and get out the standard and specifications and see what it says about, in this case, bidder preference, local bidder preference. So you don't, unlike the state, you don't have to be necessarily upfront about it, but it's there. So that's the difference between the two. So now we're going down to local bidder preference. It's allowable even if it's challenged in court. I mean, it's been proven. It's constitutionally will be upheld. Okay, so that's right now for your funding. That's the only thing keeping you in the ballgame funding-wise if you got audited. You got audited by the state, and the question was brought up to them, well, where was the preference in this project? Because it's got to be consistent. This is the only thing you got to fall back on. So now, unfortunately, Addendum 3 comes along and pulls your local preference out of the ballgame. So here now you're standing with a project that doesn't have Alaska bidder preference, doesn't have local bidder preference, has no preference at all. So if I was going to go back to the strings that are attaching you to the funding, those strings are going to get cut because they're not there anymore. You failed to prove it in the procedure to get you Alaska bidder preference. Then 4 days before bid opening, you pulled it on your own accord, or not sure exactly. I haven't been able to get the clear answer on that because there's some issues on that too. So if I don't know if you want to look up stuff on this, I'm going to have to go to, well, there's about 3 of them. First, I'll go to 4.04090, protests and remedies. Anytime there's an ambiguity in a bid document, something's unclear, you have to write a written, me as a contractor have to write a written request for clarification. It's true at this level, Ketchikan does it, state does it. If it's something in the bid document, I'm not talking about like a plan where you're asking what this dimension is incorrect, what does it mean? You know, that's a technical question, can go straight to P&D, day of bid, you can throw that out, throw out an addendum saying we meant to have 5 of those, not 4 of those. That's fine. That's something that can happen on short notice. But bid changes to bid documents, there's a mandatory. In the code book it says 10 days, and standard specification it says 7 days. You have 7 days before bid opening to file basically a protest. What you're doing is you're protesting that these documents aren't clear enough for me. I don't understand if, in this case, local bidder preference is on the table or not. So you've got to file a protest in writing with your gripe. It's got to go into the city clerk's office. She's got to file it so we can date the time. We know what's happening. And then the second part of that that's got to happen is then whoever the contracting officer is has to send out a letter to all prospective bidders or interested parties stating what's happening. Okay, in this case, something for clarification on local bidder interest came in, and we will be putting out an addendum on such and such a date, but this is what, basically getting everybody on the same page. Okay, there's something up with the bidder preference. Okay, well, what is it? Is it the funding won't allow? Is it, whatever it is, that's got to come out of your office, and the time frame is pretty clear in the code book and the standard specifications, a minimum of a week. That did not happen. It was kind of like the intent to award that you guys voted on without the intent to award, that procedure didn't happen. So we had to back up. We had to back up and say, oh, sorry, that was against code. That was our bad. We're going to back up now and do it the right way to make sure we're covered all the way through. Well, this is the same context. You guys forgot to follow a procedure. To this day, I'm not sure if it's a phone call or if you guys did it under your own accord. I doubt you guys woke up 4 days before bid opening and go, oh, crap, forgot to get the local bidder preference out. And if you did, here's the kicker. You can do it, but you got to delay the bid opening. It's kind of a thing whenever we get an addendum on the fax machine, that's the first thing you really look at is, did it change the bid date? And I had it happen a lot of times with the state. I said, well, why did they change the bid date for that? Well, because it's procedure. It didn't happen within that time frame, so they have to delay the bid date a week to make sure that time frame was met. So if it was a phone call or asking for clarification, then it's a moot point because the code book is very, very specific. It's got to be written. I mean, if you really want to get specific in the code book, you got to write it and do as I did and pay $750 for just the privilege to protest. If they find it's a good thing, they'll give you your money back, which, on this one I would say you could waive it, but if you're going to go buy the book, there's a little list there of things you have to do. But the biggest thing is it's got to be written form. It can't be a phone call. I had this happen, and it's kind of funny because it's swapped in reverse. Ketchikan Gateway Borough bid a job South Bar Harbor probably 4 or 5 years ago, and same pretense, just opposite. I was confused on bidder preference, so I called them up, called the city clerk. I said, can you clarify this for me? And I told her what I was doing, and she says, no. I said, really? I thought you could. Well, no, not in this. You write me a letter, and I'll answer your question. Oh, I thought it was kind of strange, but that's the reasoning for it. I wrote the letter. She could file it, send out letters to all prospective bidders that the question's been arose. So it's a very definite procedure there, and there's valid reasons for it. So since we didn't really follow that, I'm saying, well, let's back up and visit this now. Because I think in my first trial run through on protesting, when before intent to award came out, I brought that. I think you guys are misinterpreting state statute. You're not applying the right preferences, and that all came to a moot point because we had to start all over at ground one. So I'm basically saying that that's where we're at now. I mean, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but from my side of the fence, we need to back not up to intent of award. Maybe we need to back up to some procedures that are very important to this whole process that were not followed. And it's very interesting if you get to the state level, if you do not follow procedures, it's really black and white. You throw everything out, we bid it again because we didn't follow procedure, and we've been on the bad end of that 2 or 3 times, and it is no fun, but procedures are there. At least at this level, you have the opportunity to go back and go through the correct procedures and come to the right conclusion. I know that's a lot to throw out at you real quick. Is there any questions up to this point?
Mr. Martinson, I'm a little confused. The city manager believes in his response to your protest that there is no 10-day requirement for putting out an addendum.
No, there isn't.
Is there one?
Not for addendum. What I'm saying is...
Was one of the addendum a waiving the local bid preference?
Correct, but that's changing a bid document. There's a difference there. If you read it through the code book, if you're going to change the bid documents and the way the bid's going to be, parameters put on the bid, then there's a 10-day. When Mr.
What's your citation for that?
What's your citation? Well, it's, which one do you want? You want the state, you want the standard and specification, or do you want the code one?
I want the code one.
Okay, code. We can get code. Standard and specification will clearly define this, but you have to go under protest and remedies, because basically when you find something ambiguous in a bid document, you're going to have to protest that the ambiguity of it. If you go in standard specification, it'll tell you right there that changes to bid documents, same as the state. So section B, a protest of alleging impropriety or ambiguities in a solicitation must be filed at least 10 days before a due date of a bidder approval. Now, this is the error I think Mr. Giesbrook made. This is the second part. If a solicitation is made on a shortened time, the protest may be made before a bid proposal is due. Key to this, to me, and my counsel, is if a solicitation is made, that means if you come out to bid with something that's got to bid out in 7 days, you don't have that 10-day period or emergency bid, maybe 3 days, whatever the proposal is. It's made under that time frame that you can't meet, then you have to tell the bid date is due. But this solicitation was made well in advance of that, so you really can't interpret the second part of it because it was made shortened by time. It wasn't made on short notice, it was shortened by time. That's really kind of a thing you gotta really look at. It's not that this North Harbor came out 5 days to bid. It was 3 weeks or a month or whatever it was. It was made shortened by the fact of time elapsed, but this is very clear that if you have the time, you got, was this one 10 days beforehand. If we go to standard and specifications, I'll have to find it. I do believe it says 7 days in here somewhere, but it makes specific. Requests from bidders for interpretation or clarification of bidding documents shall be made in writing to the purchasing agent. There shall arrive at least 7 days prior to bid opening. That's in standard and specification. So it actually, between the two of them, I guess you can, if depending on which one you want to go, one says 7, one says 10, but there is a definite time frame there that if a bid is made that you have to change anything in bid documentation. It doesn't allow you 4 days before the bid opening to jerk it because you're interpreting that the solicitation was made on shortened time. It was made in plenty of time. It got shortened by time. And then if you want to go farther, we can go to state statute, because state statute has the same thing. If we're going to say consistent with state statute, we got it here, here, and at the state level. State says the same thing. If there's ambiguities in the bid documentation, it's got to be basically protested 10 days prior to bid opening.
So when
States really would. Yeah.
So the agenda, the addendum
Yeah,
waiving the local preference was made when?
the first.
And when were the bid documents open?
I'd have to go back, but the invitation to bid was probably sometime in, most of you know back there. Steve knows. Huh?
March 5th.
No, that was when the invitation to bid came out, basically, I'm going to say 3 to 4 weeks prior.
Okay.
That's
So,
the actual invitation that says we are putting this project out to bid. Here, I'll find it.
Jimmy, that's okay.
Okay.
This answered the question, is the bids were open the 5th of March.
Yeah.
And you got the notice on the 1st that the local preference
Yeah,
was
the
made
local
and waived?
preference has been pulled, so 4 days.
Okay, did you file a protest of that?
No, because and this is the reason there is because we're assuming that the borough knows what they're doing.
Okay.
We're under that assumption that, okay, they're pulling this because there's some really good reasons there. And I was assuming at the time it's got to be federal money, because the federal money is the first thing that'll pull it out. But if it was federal money, it should have been taken care
So
of.
the real issue then is, let me focus this, because you're wandering a little bit tonight.
Sorry, I do that.
The real focus is then, could the borough properly pull local preference? Isn't that the real focus?
Well, that's one of my focuses, yes, is that procedure wasn't followed to get to that addendum. Because someone had to bring up the question of we need clarification.
The borough can make an addendum on its own, can it not, for any reason it
Yeah.
deems fit?
And I did mention that, but then you have to make the time frame, then you can say that, but you have to delay the bid opening 1 week to make your 10 days.
Why?
Because you are bound by your code, by your law, that says I get a 10-day.
From the addendum?
Well, if you're doing it on your own accord, and that's the first knowledge we have of it without a letter coming out to us, then yes.
You're claiming the code requires a 10-day delay after each addendum.
Not after each addendum, because addendums can be clarification for like technical, like dimension A on plan set page, whatever, is incorrect. You know, if I say that, can you clarify that dimension for me? That doesn't fall under this ruling or this procedure.
Okay, so the procedure you're saying that requires 10 days
Right.
is in the borough code?
Right. It's in
It's
the Borough Code.
4.04090B?
Yep.
Okay.
And then it's in your standard and specifications. Article, I had it written down here. If you go to standard and specifications, I didn't write the article number down, but it's going to be 2.1 or 2.2, 2.2. So you got it in 2 spots. Now, if I go to Alaska State statute, I didn't write that statute down, but maybe by luck I put it in here. But state statute's the same thing. If you're going to change bid documentation.
And what's,
Okay, Alaska statute 36.30565.
wait a
Time
minute,
for final
wait,
protest.
slow down.
Okay, sorry.
36.30565.
565.
Any subsection?
It just says time for, there's an A and a B.
Okay.
Time for filing a protest. A protest based on alleged improprieties or ambiguities in a solicitation. Those are a couple big words for a construction guy like me, but basically saying if it's unclear, must be filed 10 days before the due date of a bid or proposal. And there's a whole paragraph that goes farther, but basically it's saying the same thing, your city code, your city standard and specifications, Alaska statute says all the same thing. If you're going to change bid document, bottom line, we need 10 days. And that's just basically to get us maybe to the point we're at now where I'm coming to you and say, hey, what's just happening here? What are the strings attached? What is this whole thing? So we're not, not doing it afterwards, I guess. So it's a 10 days, and then the other thing is if you go farther into it, then if that protest is made, there's obligations the city has to follow because of that. You have to send, if Tamco puts in a protest, you got to send out letters to all prospective bidders stating what my protest is.
Okay, but there was no protest.
Not that we know, I guess. That's what I was trying to clarify, because I've asked for written, is there any written documentation? No, there is not. No one protested or asked for clarification according to the records.
Okay, but there's nothing that stopped the borough from putting out the March 1st memo with,
There is,
what is that?
the 10-day.
Okay, so
You can't change it within, you can't go a day or 2 days before a bid or 4 days before a bid and change the bid documents without giving me 10 days notice or 7 days notice. Same in state law. They can't do it at the state level, you can't do it at this level. It's too confusing. It raises issues. You know, you got to have really, that's why I said you could do it, but you would have had to delay that bid opening a week. And that happens all the time. You'll see bid delays delayed for a week and you go, why? Well, there was a simple question asked, but we didn't know the ramifications of it, but they gave us a week to think about it. So you got that, and then the procedure that follows it. You know, there's a definite, if you go through the code book, there's a definite procedure that follows any, and you got to think, and I shouldn't even use protest, because if you're asking for clarification, it doesn't seem like you should be protesting anything. But according to code, it is standard specs. They kind of bring it down a little bit more common knowledge. They say, you know, anything in the bid document, state level is, you know, anything. It's kind of almost back to the ambiguity and that it's all a protest. You know, it's hard to clear that out of your head. But even if you want to change that on your own accord, which I guess I'm not sure if that's what the stance is here or not, that you guys just went in and changed it. I hope not, because if it did, then I've shown avenues where if the funding strings are really there and you're attached to them, by pulling local bidder preference, you're actually in more jeopardy now than you were before.
why?
Because you didn't, to stay consistent with, to be able to apply Alaska bidder preference on a bigger envelope, there's things you got to follow.
The bidder preference is for state residents. The municipal preference is for local residents.
Well, you're right in some ways, but if you go into actually Alaska bidder preference, and this is the only downfall of Alaska bidder preference, I can show you on paper where Home Depot will actually be an Alaska bidder, will actually, can be an Alaska bidder preference receivee, I guess, that they can qualify. They're really loose on their qualifications at that level. So, but the bottom line is, to be consistent with state procurement law, you have to have a preference.
You do not have to have a local business bidder preference to be consistent with state law.
But you have to have a preference, is what I'm saying. You got to either have an Alaska bidder preference or a local bidder preference.
And where does the state law say that?
It's the very first purpose, 3630.18.
Yeah, I've read that.
Okay, the legislature finds that basically that this is what they're saying is their Alaska bidder preference.
Yeah, but I didn't see anything in there that says that if it's not the state, it must be local.
No, I'm deducing that since you guys did not follow state procedure to get Alaska bidder preference, because there's procedures you have to follow. That was what I was saying. In the bid documents, it's going to have to state this is bid under Alaska bidder preference. It's not something that the state says is inferred. You can't infer Alaska bidder preference is going to apply to this job just because the funding is set there. You got to say it in the bid documents, and that's very clear. So outside companies looking at it know there's Alaska bidder preference on the table. So you can't just infer it's going to happen. And you can call the state procurement office and ask them about it, but they're and state design guys know it. It's got to be, they put it in the bid documents. It's in some form or another, it's in the bid documents, whether it's states it right there at the front of it with a 5% in big black letters, or if you look in the bid tabulations, it'll be 5%. Sometimes they use Alaska product or Alaska bidder preference So when you do your bid tabulations, like you guys have done on yours, maybe this will help you a little bit. So you guys do your bid tabulations. If this was a Alaska bidder preference project, right under here, we'll say 5% Alaska products percentage or whatever, and we will take 5% off all the bidders that qualify for that under that law. So that's where I'm getting to, John, is that you only have local bidder preference now because you procedurally you didn't follow the Alaska, consistent with Alaska statute. You didn't follow, you know, if you in procurement is they're hesitant to answer questions, but they're very, because it's law, it's black white. You got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this, otherwise it doesn't count. They're very, very strict. To give you an example of how strict they are, we did a job in Angoon, kind of a same thing deal. That addendum comes out 7 days before, the saying that you have to use the Buy America certificate, has to be signed and in with your bid documents, not post-bid like past, to meet FTA funding sources. Job went out to bid. One bidder out of 7 had it in with their bid. State looked at that and said, well, that's way too confusing, you know, because we got to go black and white now. we basically ended up on that small of a technicality where it doesn't matter if it's pre-bid or post-bid, it gets thrown out. So I'm just using that as a reference. Is, you know, it's pretty strict when you get to that level for obvious reasons, because there's, you know, it is law. It is, you know, we think of codes and statutes and things, but it's law. It's like a speeding law. You can't be at home and know you can make it to the post office if you drive the speed limit and obey the signs, but a phone call comes in and you're late and you speed through town, run through 5 stop signs, and you get there in time, it didn't close, and you're saying, we made it. No, really, you didn't. It's not the destination, it was that journey. It was those codes you broke getting to that destination. You might have got away with it, you know, and if I wasn't a little persistent, a little ornery and going, well, that doesn't seem right, and digging and digging and digging, spending 40, 50 hours reading statute and code book and this and that and court reports from other projects, you know, you might have got away with it. But I'm saying, hey, we missed some steps. There's some things that aren't quite right, and I don't think as a borough and a town we want to be able to be put in that position. Or, you know, best case scenario, if at least this gets you to look at what procedures need to be happen and, you know, things that need to be done correctly, then at least I've been heard, I guess.
Okay, let me be clear again, because I'm looking at your appeal on page 3, fourth paragraph down, which is what we've been talking about. Since Alaska bidder preference was not applied, your only option to stay consistent with state procurement statutes. What you're saying is you must apply the local bidder preference to stay consistent with state statutes, and I'm asking for your authority on that. What statute are you relying on for that statement? Because I saw nothing in state law that said that.
Well, what I'm relying on is the consistency you have to follow to be with your state deferred funding. It says you got to follow state procurement law, and if state procurement law says there's a preference on the table, there's got to be a preference on the table.
Where does it? It says there has to be a state preference talked about. It doesn't say anything about a local preference.
No, it doesn't. But local bidder preference can fit in there. The state doesn't have to say you got your own local bidder preference. Maybe best way to put it is maybe you're skeptical that you can't apply it. Well, there's nothing in state statute that says you cannot apply the same thing you're asking. You're saying asking me if it's telling you have to apply. I'm saying no. But at the same time, it's telling me there's nothing in that whole state statute that says you can't.
Okay, we're on the same page now, but we weren't there before. Okay,
that's why I like questions. So that's the dilemma we're in. So now we got to balance these two and figure out, well, which one's going to apply to keep you in consistency with the preference.
Now I've lost you again.
No.
Because
there has to be a preference on the table, bottom line. Whether it be Alaska bidder or local.
I suggest again, you have no authority for that statement, Jim.
Okay. Well,
I mean, I'm telling you, if you got authority, you better bring it out.
well, I think I have in
Okay,
in
go
the
ahead.
statutes, but I mean,
Go ahead. Sorry.
that's all right. I don't mind a little cross-examination either. It might be against the rules, but it's good fun. Okay, so
It's not against the rules, excuse me, for
Yeah,
assembly to
I'm
ask
just-
questions.
if he's
He's
gonna,
picking on me.
I'm-
It's okay.
we're picking on each other. It's okay, and I don't hold it against you, John. And I want this body to, I'm not here to try to, strong arm you into anything. I just want to bring up my side of it and where I think things have gone a little bit awry in this whole process. So,
Jimmy, I appreciate everything you're doing here. It's a great education for me.
and a little tangent for you guys, but you can take these things to procurement at the state level and let them review it for you. You said that, why do these guys not, if it says you have to be consistent, why not do that? But that's another date, another issue. I'm sure I bored you enough, but that's basically a lot of it that I have on the table. There are some things, I think maybe the big one for me is misinterpreting is when you get into 4.04050 bidder preference for residents. There's a part A which says basically you got to give a preference to a local company if the funding allows it. I mean, I'm paraphrasing it. But then there's a part C that says that, and this is where I think the manager's interpretation of it's a little different than mine and my lawyers, is that if it's not in the best interest of the borough, that they can not apply it. Okay, not the best and if you prove me wrong, great. But what my counsel and I have interpreted that as, you got part A that says you got it. Now down C here, you're saying, let's say, and basically he's saying that because of the size of the project, that $98,000 mark is too much money, too much preference to apply. That's not what I believe Part C is saying. Part C is saying that if you want me to read the wording for you, I will, or are you familiar with it? Okay, good, because I'll get confused too. But basically it's saying if you've had bad issues with a local contractor where he's botched a job, you're in a lawsuit with them, maybe he's given you a bid to build airplanes and all, he's built his cars, so you think it's out his expertise, you're not bound to apply the 5%. You have a way out if it's not going to be a workable situation. If there's no way, if the last job I picked Carl up and threw him off the bridge and threw him in the water and told him never come back on, those kind of things would make a hard working relationship, and that's what that one is basically telling us, that, well, if you have bad blood basically with a contractor, you're not obligated to give them the bid based on that 5%.
Ms. Mayor, may I ask one question? May I ask we've had this conversation before because you called me.
Yeah.
I don't read C that way. I read C that the city, through its employees, has unfettered discretion to say, for this contract, we're going to waive the local bidder preference. If you have any authority from you or your council to say that discretion is fettered, now would be a good time to bring it to our attention.
Alaska statute, we got to jump back to Alaska statute, I guess. And I'm not sure, and maybe Mr. Hogue would know better if you're in conflict with Alaska statute, what the ramifications are. But there are several, and this is more of a guide. We can go in and find the statutes on it, but there are several preferences applied to state of Alaska procurement, regardless of their dollar value. That's very important, regardless of their dollar value. So what the state statute is saying is that once preference is on the table, and we've known for decades that the size of this project, you can't come 4 days ahead of the bid result and say, oh my gosh, that's quite a preference. I don't think that we can, throw the dollar amount out. Preference is 5%. Competitive bidding is all on percentages. It's you know, your profit margin, your corporate overhead, everything's a percentage of a bid. You know, that's how we do it. So that's where that 5%, you know, it kind of correlates with that. But state statute says regardless of dollar amount. So it, I don't got this, but this was in the packet I gave you that I emailed. So we got that, you know, once you get to the point where you're applying bidder preference, coming on the backside and or 4 days ahead and saying, well, that's too much of an advantage. But is it really too much of an advantage? Let's put it to you this way. You're going to bid a job and you put a local bidder preference on the table. Do you think you're going to get higher bids? And you don't have to answer that because I can't really, I'll tell you my perspective, no. If you put Alaska bidder preference or local bidder preference on the table, companies from outside Alaska, outside of Petersburg, are going to know they have to account for that in their percentages. They're going to have to overcome that. So logic would tell me that if we got local bidder preference on the table, we're not going to come in at 8.5 million. No, it's going to come in lower because to be competitive, we have to be able. If I was going to Ketchikan and had to overcome they got the same rule, 5% up to 5 million, 2.5% after that. They got the same exact. I got to account for that, and I got to figure a way to get around that if I want to be truly competitive. So you guys are actually getting the best of both worlds because if you have Alaska bidder preference, our local bidder preference on the table, you're going to get a much more competitive bid than if it wasn't. Same thing is, and we got I didn't bring the notes, but if we listen to the minutes from the Harbor Board, and I think Kurt.
Could we stop for a minute
Yep.
and have them put their mutes on?
Those of you that are listening in by telephone, can you please put on your mute buttons because background sound is coming through, drowning out the speaker. Thank you.
I can talk louder if you want. And more angry. Kurt asked a really good question. He said, could you have got, and I think he asked the question of Jan, could you have got your bid any lower? And Jan's response was no. He had, because Tamako was sitting in Petersburg, he had to basically look at his mobilization cost of, I can't remember what he said, 80 to 100,000 per diem and that. He had to look at that and knew he had to, in order to be competitive, he was going to have to adjust the way, and I'm just taking, you can look in the notes, I'm not going to put words into his mouth, but so right off the bat, if you did not have a local company in town, guess where your bids are coming in? 200, maybe higher. My gut feeling is if there is no local contractor in this area that can do the skilled work that you have on the table, then you're paying all mobilization costs. You're going to pay all per diem because it's an even table. If this job was in Cake, we're all mobilizing in there, guaranteed 250, 300,000 more to do the same project just because we know it's an even table. Okay, so now we got, and I'm not just going to point at myself, we got Rock and Road, we got Reed Brothers, Jesse West, there's a number of local contractors in town that can do skilled labor. And when a job comes up that they're able to do, other contractors have to account for that. And, if you go through the Harbor Board meetings, it's, 90 to 100,000. Oh, guess what the preference was if it was applied? 90 to 100,000. Okay, that's one job. How many jobs in the last 30-something years have we had the Tamacos or the Rock and Roads or these other guys sitting in town, and that comes into effect? It comes, and it does. When you've been to a job everywhere, the first thing you think of, well, who's there? Is there anyone set up there? Who's benefited for that over the last so many years? So.
Can I ask a question? We can't debate the merits of the dollar amount, but I'm trying to be clear on what section of Alaska state statute, without trying to play lawyer, that you're hinging your argument on, and I think it's 36.10.150, but I may be incorrect.
For actually having bidder
For
preference?
actually having a bidder preference, is that Title 40 or Title 36?
36.30.150 bid. Well, you can find it in two spots: bid acceptance and evaluation, and 36.30.110 invitation to bid. And at the end of it, it'll say a description of all contractual terms and conditions applicable to the procurement. So Alaska bidder preference is a condition that will be applied to the procurement after tabulation, basically.
So can you state those again?
AS 36.30.110. And then this is basically bid acceptance and bid evaluation will tell you the same thing, but it's going to say we can't evaluate unless, like, we can't evaluate bidder preference unless it was in the bid documents. So you can't just say, come behind and say, well, all the companies were Alaska bidder preference, we got to wait. No, it says right here, invitation to bid must set out evaluation and criteria used. Criteria may not be used in the bid evaluation if they are not set out in the invitation to bid. So that's a definite parameter. They're saying you can't use Alaska bidder preference unless you spell it out in the invitation. And it's a lot to, I get confused, and I've been looking at it for a week, so.
I'm looking at the Alaska state statutes, and 36.10110 has been repealed.
180?
180, thank you.
Yeah. I just printed it off again this morning, so I hope it didn't repeal it in the short time. It's possible. Anything's possible in this thing. So no, in my whole discussion of this is what is in the best interest of the borough. You know, and I guess maybe my biggest beef with the manager's denial of protest was that he did not feel it was in the best interest of the borough to spend $98,000 and change when, you know, let's look at the real reality of having, you know, local skilled employees. That's the whole reason the state started preference, was to say, hey, we want to build the economy of the state. It's the whole reason you guys have it in your code book now, is that we want to build Petersburg to a strong point where we're employing its local citizens. We're getting the most bang for a buck we can. I mean, we're talking 90,000. I can sit down with you and you know, wages for this job for my employees, probably, if I take out workman's comp, it's going to be 350,000. Our corporate expenditures annually in Petersburg, I mean, like Hammer and Week on, outboard shops, you name it, whatever we spend. Napa is a good one. Petro Marine. There's a whole list of things that we spend money on, and we average between $250,000 and $300,000 in corporate expenditures here in Petersburg. And it even jumps up more when we're actually working in town, because that's on an average year. 75% of the time we're working out of town. You know, that's just the nature of the business. So when we're working in town, we actually spend more money. We'll be down at Piston and Rudder getting new gen sets, rebuilding engines there. And you know, I put it in the packet that Cindy got, but I got several letters from local businesses stating, you know, what that means to them to have, especially Trident, Ocean Beauty, Icicle Seafoods. When something goes wrong with their facility and they're all built over the water, what's it mean to have someone that's close by to be able to do the work that they need done? What savings is it to them not to have to pay $40,000, $50,000 to mob someone in to drive 4 or 5 piling that got snapped off because a boat got out of control? So, you know, we've been with the cities. You got it beefed up now, but the old Petro Marine dock, I mean, I could guarantee you once a year or once every 2 years, there's 3 or 4 fender piling would have been snapped off just because the fuel barge was too big. You know, just think of the ramifications if you would have had to mob someone in from Juneau or Ketchikan or even Wrangell every spring to have them to do repairs on your job. So I really, you know, if you want to talk numbers, saying that it's not in the best interest of the borough to apply Alaska bidder preference at any percentage, you know, I would disagree.
Mr. Martinson, a question here. Getting back to your number one question here on the state procurement statutes and regarding to deferred maintenance funding, Alaska statute 36.10.180. Does bidder preference need to be apparent?
Yes, for state, on state level.
To make this
Well,
work,
like I said,
for to be able to use these funds. I guess that's my question.
That is one of the strings, the way I'm reading it, because that was the strings that they've
To
been
me-
dangling.
Because to me, that's your only argument at this point, you know, I mean, I
Yeah.
appreciate everything that this
Yeah,
company
no,
does for this.
I mean, it all came,
Yeah.
why would they not pull it
Right.
out if they didn't think it was going to affect their funding?
Right.
Now, I've come back the other way and say, well, in theory, you shouldn't have pulled it out because now you're really affecting your funding.
I under-
So
yeah, I understood
if
that.
you're going to pull it on one way, then you got to listen to my argument on the other side
Right.
is, well,
Right.
why'd you pull it then?
Right.
Okay, Ms. Lagatakis?
In looking at the statute that you've given, the 180, it refers back to statute 150, which talks about a zone of underemployment. I don't know enough about Alaska or Petersburg to know if we qualify as a zone of underemployment.
The whole state of Alaska.
Okay,
I do, but
okay.
John, you might jump in because I'm just a layman, but basically it's the whole premise of why even Alaska bidder preference got, it's geographically and economically to the best interest of the state of Alaska to invoke bidder preference, and they've worded it, they've gone through it.
But it specifically talks about zone of underemployment, and if Petersburg does not follow under that zone, then that pretty much negates your argument.
And according to, and I could find it, but any rural area is going to fall under that.
Okay.
But the balloon thing on it is Alaska bidder preference goes, you know,
And then my second question is, if Petersburg did not qualify as a zone of underemployment, do you still have an argument about the process? Or does that take away your objection?
if the process, this is my theory on the process, then I said that earlier, if the least that comes out of this is we figure out that process and you get this stuff down on a cheat sheet where you can, you know, go down and say, funding checked, what applies, check, this, and strings attached to funding, okay, we got to go check this, you know, and then that's what I was saying, the Alaska Procurement Office will actually, if you ask for help, they'll help you out with that. Actually, the guy that's retiring, if you want to get it, I'll talk to him again, but he said he's thinking of going in consulting because he sees this so much in the municipalities. You're not singled out, believe me. He said, you know, there's all these municipalities that are going, you know, don't understand state stuff and this stuff and don't know, you know, this is all this guy's dealt with for 30 years. He said, I would be seriously thinking of consulting or at least coming down and training, but that's a side note. But
So
the city is
I'm still not clear.
Okay.
If the bidder preference part of your argument is no longer applies, do you
Yeah.
still have an argument about procedure?
I have an argument about
Okay,
procedure.
okay,
Yes.
just so I understand.
Yes, because if it doesn't apply, the procedure that led up to it, if it was at the state level, we would be rebidding it.
Okay.
They probably wouldn't have got this far. They would have said, oh, you know, I'm just speculation on my part, but that is, I can't say no to the procedure because if the procedure wasn't followed and this other stuff falls apart, the destination is not important. That journey is really important in procurement. And, you know, we got to follow it. So, and you know, the reality of, you know, let's say it did go out for rebid. I know you guys think you're in a time crunch, but the biggest time crunch I can see is making sure this harbor is demoed by the time Pacific Pile comes into dredge.
Yeah, Jimmy, going back to the Borough Code and your 10-day argument, I don't read the code the way you do. What I read in is the second sentence of 4.090B is that if this borough in its wisdom amended the specs March 1st, okay, less than 10 days, the second sentence seems to say that the result is if you want to protest or ask for clarification on that amendment, you've got a shorter time period. It doesn't say anywhere that you delay the opening to allow 10 days for a full length of protest.
I guess the wording of it is what you're going to have to, if a solicitation is made under short notice, that means you came out to bid under the 10-day or 7-day period. It doesn't say that this solicitation that has been there for 3 weeks is all of a sudden shortened by time. That's not what it's saying. It's saying made under shortened time frame. That's very important to clarification. And if we want to go back one step further, we'll go back to the state statute, and they're even a little more clear. It's just the same thing. And believe me, we've been through, I don't know, I've been through in 30 years.
Are you claiming
many
a
procurements.
state statute trumps 4.04090 and has a mandated different requirement?
If you're going to stay consistent with your funding. That's why I say is once you stay, you got to stay consistent with your funding. Then there's other things you got to look at besides, you know, the code books here, state statutes here. Now we got 2 levels we got to go through. That's, you know, state funding is great because it gets you free money, but it complicates your life because now you got 2 sets of rules that you got to try to.
Are you
consistent.
saying that there's any provision of state statute that's violated by the addendum of less than 10 days' notice?
Yeah.
Which provision? I don't see that in your appeal.
That'll be 36.30.565 time for filing a protest.
Wait a minute, 30 point.
36.30.565. Basically, it's the same thing. It's you're saying that there's a definite time frame we got to follow here. You can't come in the 11th hour and pull something in the bid documents without a period of time.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So, I don't even know, I lost my outline a long time ago, so I've probably been rambling enough, but that's pretty much in a nutshell what I'm talking about.
Well, we're responsible for your getting a sidetrack case.
Yeah, that's okay. I can do it well on my own. You know, bottom line is that there were some, you know, definite procedural things that are questionable. You know, that we have grounds. You know, it'd be nice to take care of it at this level. There's enough there that says, you know, we didn't follow things like we should have. I mean, the intent awards is a classic example. You know, this body voted on to award a project that it shouldn't have, and we had to backtrack to get it done right. Now I'm saying now we got this other thing here, that same thing, we didn't follow procedure. We need to backtrack, make sure you do it right. Otherwise, let's just, you know, toss it out, rebid the thing. Or, you know, you might go in the office, talk to your lawyer and say, well, we got every right to push forward with this. And that's, you know, that's fine with me. That just puts the decision on me to ask, you know, do I ask the state to audit the funding to make sure procedures were followed all the way through? Was this procurement procedure done correctly, by the book? Because that's what it'll come down to at the next level, is was everything done by the book? And I've had jobs with the state that have got rebid because they weren't done by the book. So I have a sense of what they feel up at the next level. It's fairly black and white in what we got to do. So yeah, no, if there's no more questions, I'll let Mr. Giesbrook. I'm sure
Yep.
Do you have any questions for Mr. Martinson?
No.
Okay.
chicken.
Mark, I know you're on by cell phone. Are you by chance moving it around a lot?
I'm trying not to.
Okay. Very good.
Thank you, Jim. Oh,
Ms. Mayor, I'd like to take a 2-minute recess.
okay. We can do that.
Okay, now, wait a second.
Are you at the podium now?
Jim, how about now?
Well, we can hear it, but it's still somewhat faint.
My guess is that microphone is not getting into this.
I'll be as loud as I possibly can.
I heard that very clear.
Ms. Mayor?
Back in session. Okay, we're back. And we will continue now with the borough manager presenting his grounds for denial of the protest. Mr. Hoag?
Ms. Mayor, I don't know what the rest of the assembly wants to do, but I have spent considerable time over the last week or so reading statutes, including this morning, and looking at code. I'm prepared to make a motion and deal with the appeal right now without hearing anything more, quite frankly. If that would be if we can do that.
I would recommend you talk to the borough attorney and make
Mr.
sure.
Brennan, did you hear Mr. Hoag's?
I think I did. I heard him say that he's prepared to make a motion. Now, I guess I would recommend that you hear from the borough manager first, so that we have a record here reflecting both sides.
Okay.
Okay. So, Kathy, you want to swear in Mr. Giesbrecht?
You affirm that you will tell the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Mrs. Mayor and Assembly, the decision to award the North Harbor construction project to Western Dock and Bridge was made following the Petersburg standard bid specifications and the specific project bid specifications. While the municipal code allows for a local bidder preference of 5%, the bid specifications of this project did not allow for this preference. This is due to a prior agreement with the state of Alaska when the North Harbor facility was deeded to Petersburg, and confirmed by the issuance of Addendum 3 of the North Harbor bid specifications, which clearly state that there will be no local bidder preference. In addition, the issue of a local bidder preference was brought up and discussed during the pre-bid conference. It was in this meeting where Western Dock and Bridge specifically asked about whether or not the local bidder preference applied to this project. P&D, the engineer on this project, felt this issue was sufficiently covered in the Petersburg standard bid specifications where a local bidder preference is not allowed. It was determined that it could not apply due to the state requirements. After later discussion, it was nevertheless determined that it was the right thing to do to add clarification to the issue. That's why Addendum 3 was issued to the bid specifications for the project. The additional addendum was issued so all interested parties were aware of this clarification. Tamico was not present at this meeting, but did acknowledge the receipt of Addendum 3, which addressed this issue and was emailed to Tamico and the other bidders on March 1st. Also, Tamico was present at the actual bid awards on March 5th, 2013, where the bids were opened and reviewed. At no time during this bid opening process did Tamico mention a protest of Addendum 3 or any other part of the bid specifications. During the process, there was a premature bid award to Western. As soon as we became aware of this, we canceled this award and issued the notice of intent to award pursuant to the Petersburg Code. This issue had no impact on the evaluation of the bids, nor did it impact how the bid is awarded. On this basis, the North Harbor construction project was awarded to the low bidder, Western Dock and Bridge. In your packets, there's several items which I'm going to kind of quickly go over for you that are part of this review process. First is a chronology of the events for the North Harbor reconstruction bid process, just kind of the important dates. A copy of Ordinance 4.04.050 of the Petersburg Municipal Code that notes the local bidder preference of 5%, but also noting that Petersburg is not, quote, precluded from making the purchase or award from whatever source is most advantageous to the city after considering all factors in the public interest. It's a key issue and was brought up by Tamico. These factors in this case include, they're not just limited to the 90,000, 98,000. First, a local bidder preference would have created a substantial liability risk to the Petersburg Borough due to the departure from the transfer project agreement with the Department of Transportation and Public Facilities. This is the state agency that deeded the harbor to Petersburg. could have resulted in either a challenge by DOTPF or the low bidder, resulting in delay of the project, including the potential for losing core support, the dredging process, and or the possibility of having to redo the permit procedure for this process. That's some of the things that went through the process of this consideration. Number two, by awarding to the lowest bidder, the borough's overall cost in this large and expensive project were decreased. And three, because the bid request went out without protest, it would expose the borough to liability if the award was now made contrary to the terms of the bid request, which did not include a local bidder preference. Number three on my list there. Approximately $2.9 million for the North Harbor project was sourced in the agreement with the Department of Transportation and Public Facilities accompanying that harbor transfer to us. You'll see that in Transfer Project Agreement Exhibit 2, number 10, specifically talks about this. The borough was now permitted to use these funds as matching funds in order to get the additional state DOT-PF grant. The Transfer Project Agreement shows the requirement that the city or the borough shall select contractors using competitive procurement principles consistent with the state procurement code, Alaska Statutes 3630. This requirement does not mean that Petersburg must be in lockstep with the state procurement code, but awarding to the lowest responsible bidder is a fundamental requirement of the code. A local bidder preference is not consistent with the fundamental requirements of the state procurement code. The sole exception to this is the Alaska bidder preference. Since both Western and Tamako are Alaska bidders, and they were the two lowest bids, the deciding factor continues to be the lowest responsible bidder as outlined in the North Harbor bid specifications. Included in your packet is the bill of sale and the transfer project agreement for the South and Middle Harbor projects that show the same restriction and no local preference that was used in these projects. This is consistent, again, with how the North Harbor bid process was conducted. Exhibit 3, you'll see the certification showing that Tamako acknowledged receipt of Addendum 3, which was the clarification on the removal of the local bidder preference, on March 1st, 2013, as well as the other addendums associated with the bid specifications. These addendum were all issued less than 10 days before the bid opening, which is not uncommon, where the owner, Petersburg, wants to be responsive to errors pointed out by prospective bidders. In Exhibit 4, you'll see the pre-bid conference sign-in sheet on February 14th, 2013, where the local bidder preference was clarified with the parties present. Tamako did not attend that meeting. Exhibit 5, the specific special provisions for the Middle Harbor, noting the removal of the local bidder preference, with Tamako bidding on the project knowing the local bidder preference did not apply. The contract was awarded to Western over Tamako's bid by approximately $90,000. Also, the South Harbor Phase 4, Tamako submitted a bid knowing the local bidder preference did not apply. The contract was awarded to McGraw, who was just $6,278 less than Tamako. In both of these cases, Tamako bid knowing the local bidder preference did not apply and did not protest the bid process or the results. Exhibit 6 is P&D's bid tabulation and recommendation for award to Western. Exhibit 7, the evidence that Western Dock and Bridge is an Alaskan bidder. Not critical in this project, but we did verify that. Some of the other documents, now these are not in your packet because of their size. Kathy's got available if anybody wants to look at them, which was the North Harbor Reconstruction Project Manual and plans and all bidders' bids. The Petersburg Borough Standard Specifications, which were thoroughly reviewed and recommended for amendment by an independent agency in 2012. Again, this is the Petersburg Standard Bid Specifications, which were approved by the former City Council. The current standard specifications no longer contain a local bidder preference, specifically Section 10.02, Articles 2.1 and 2.2. And I'd like to read a little bit of that. 2.1, The submission of a bid shall be an admission that the bidder has made such examination and is satisfied as to the conditions to be encountered in performing the work and as to the requirements and accuracy of the bidding documents. Again, the submission of the bid. 2.2, bidder shall notify the purchasing agent promptly of any error, omission, or inconsistency that may be discovered during examination of the bidding documents. There were no written or verbal objections to the bid documents made prior to the bids being opened. And also available over there is the pre-2012 standard specifications, which were done in 1997, where Section 10, Article 3.4, provided for the 5% local preference. Again, this was taken out in 2012 of our standard bid specifications. Just to conclude, the borough staff, in consultation with P&D and the borough attorney, agree that the award of the North Harbor construction project to Western Dock and Bridge is correct, and the appeal of Tamco should be denied. Have any questions? Tried to make it fast.
Any questions for the manager? Okay.
Anything from the phone? Mark?
Mark, do you have any questions for the manager? Mark? John?
Yes. Thank you. Steve, I have
Yes, sir.
3 questions, and I basically think you answered them, but just because I'm not that bright, I want to be clear. Was Western Dock did some previous work on our harbors, I believe. Do you know, or maybe this would be for Chloe, was that work adequate and up to standards?
I could speak to it if you want. Glow, she's going to be more accurate. She'll need to be sworn in. And I've never heard a complaint about the previous work done by Western Dock, and to my knowledge, they do a really good job.
So, basically, we didn't have any litigation against them for poor work or anything previously.
We did not, but this is before my time, so I'm afraid of answering too much here. I'm not aware of anything. No.
Okay, thank you. And the other question is,
Can you hear me at all?
No, we didn't hear you. Just hang on for a moment, Mark.
Okay.
and I believe you just answered this one, but would we be open to litigation if we did not award this to Western Dock?
That is our feeling, yes.
Okay, and I know all of us, are totally in favor of local, supporting our local contractors 100%. Is there a way legally that we could award this to them without being in having a problem?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you.
Member Jensen, did you have a question for Mr. Giesbrecht?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I just,
Yes, ma'am.
after hearing John's question, are you aware of any complaints about Tamco's work?
Not at all.
Okay.
Everything I've ever heard is nothing
Me
but
either.
quality,
I just
good
want to
work.
put it on the record.
Okay, and that was Member Strand, for the record. Any further questions? Does the borough have any further witnesses?
No, ma'am.
Okay. At this point, we are open for final arguments. If you'd like to take a stand again, Jim?
I guess final arguments kind of sounds combative, but we'll do the best we can. A lot of the premises on this is that we know the borough knows what their funding sources and what the restrictions are and strings attached. He brought up several projects in the past, and I'm going to go on speculation. Things were different back then. We were working out of town. Or there's different parameters. But I'm willing to bet if I went into that strings attached thing and looked, I could come up with the same arguments I've come up with now. And Skagway's proved it. You can apply local bidder preference. There's nothing in the state statute that says you can't. I applaud Skagway. They're a little town, but they got big kahunas, I guess, because they actually took it a step farther than I thought they would. But that to me is an indication of a town that's really supportive of local businesses. They're going to, if they know the strings, they know the wording, they're going to apply it if they can. I'd like to go back to part A of your bidder resident preference, and it's very when you look at that, you got to really look at it. It says shall apply. It doesn't say may apply. It says shall apply. So when you got something that says you shall or will apply it, it's unquestionable. You got to apply it. Now, if you go down to section C, you really can't use that in the context that Mr. Giesbrecht is using, because he's in direct conflict then with what Part A is saying. Part A says you got to apply it. Now he's coming back and say, well, for these other reasons, I can say no, we don't. But they're conflicting, and the reason I think he's in error is that's putting a lot of weight on his shoulders. He's saying, and the attorney's shoulders. They're interpreting Part C in a totally different context than I think. Well, I do, my counsel does, or who knows, maybe a judge would. I'm not sure. Hey, bidder preference is at the state level. If you're going to stay consistent with this project for your funding, if you're going to argue that we have to take it out, then that opens the door for discussion on whether it should be there or not. I've got some pretty good proof. You got to have some bidder preference in there. It's state law. If it's state's got funding in it, no federal or international funds involved, there's got to be a preference, whether it's local or Alaska bidder. Okay? There's procedures you got to follow if you're going to put Alaska bidder preference in there. I've confirmed it with the state procurement office. I've confirmed it with the state Department of Design at the Alaska Marine Highway Systems that put out a lot of these type projects. DOT puts out a lot of these projects, and they confirm that if it's not in the bid documents, they can't apply it. So, but at the same time, state law says it's got to be there. A preference has got to be there because it's state. There's no federal funds. There's no outside funds. We got to keep our Alaskan companies working at the state level. Okay, come down to this next layer. Your code says you shall apply it. Okay, unless the funding doesn't allow it. Okay, you're opening up the door and saying the funding doesn't allow it because there's strings attached. Okay, I'm coming in that door and I'm looking at what the strings are and what other municipalities have done recently. I mean, this job in Skagway last September, the wording is such that constitutionally your local bidder preference is going to hold up all the way to federal Supreme Court. If there's nothing in the state statute that says you cannot apply it. So if you're coming to me and arguing that your funding says it's got to go, I'm arguing and saying no, in actuality your funding actually says it's got to stay because you have no preference on the table if you pull it. So you're actually in more jeopardy. Standard and specifications, and Mr. Giesbrecht brought up a very good point that I was not at the pre-bid meeting. I was busy. We were working on Ocean Beauty, trying to get them up and running. And if it's not a mandatory pre-bid, and it's in an area where I'm very familiar with, I know what North Harbor's about. I know the area. I know what to do. There's not a lot I get out of a pre-bid meeting. If I'm at issue, I'll ask for the minutes so I can read and see who's in attendance. But your own bidder specifications talk about this. Okay. Request from a bidder for interpretation or clarification of this is Article 2.2 if you want to follow. A bidding document shall be made in writing to purchase agent and shall arrive at least 7 days prior to the date of bid openings. Oral questions may be presented at a pre-bid conference if one is provided in the documents. Then there's a little bit more. Bidders shall not reply on interpretations, corrections, and changes made in any other matter talking about written, including orally at a pre-bid conference. So you can ask the question at a pre-bid conference. I can ask this question, does this apply, does this, but it doesn't have any weight unless you put it in writing and give it to the city clerk and say, this is what I want clarification on. Then we can document it, then the letters can go out, then the process can start. The whole thing would work itself out then. We would be doing that beforehand instead of now. So Cindy asked a very good question. Would if everything worked out in Western Doc's favor, would the procedure part of it, would I be hung up? Yes, I would, because the procedure was not followed in this process. And I think I got enough evidence that if you, and you guys might see it a different way, your lawyer might say, well, you got a strong case, but I also got a very strong case that procedures weren't followed through this whole process. I mean, several big ones, including voting on an award before intent to award, the procedures leading up to addendum number 3, there were some very big things missed there that if you take it to the next level, they're going to look at that black and white and say, was procedure followed? If it wasn't, okay, out it goes. So I think I've given you an avenue of a way you could go back and correct and do the correct procedure and take all this into account now. And if you don't see it that way, your lawyer doesn't see it, if you're worried that if you come out with a turn in our favor that they're going to protest, it probably will, who knows. But now we've all laid it out as far as, okay, here's what the rules say. Here's what the laws say. You can fact check it. You can do it the right way. It's one side of the fence or the other. There's litigation involved when procedures aren't followed. That's the cruel, hard fact of it, I guess. But then if it does go out to rebid, we have a very strong argument, and I can back it up more, that if it did go out to rebid, you're going to have to either have at least Alaska bidder preference and spelled out, okay? But according to your code book, you should have local bidder preference because you can do it constitutionally. It will be upheld. There's other municipalities that have paved the way for you, so the only thing you're hiding behind is, I don't know. It's there. That's all I can say. It's there for you to decipher. I don't envy your job. There'll be no hard feelings between. I'll still wave at John and try to run him over maybe afterwards. But you're in a tough position. There are some procedural errors that directly impact me, Jan, this whole community actually when you get down to it. So I just want to make sure you guys do it the right way. So there's no way in 20 years they'll use you as a case study for things that went wrong or things that went right or whatever. Just get in there, do it the right way, and get it done. Thanks.
Mr. Griesberg?
Make it very quick for you. On the Skagway issue, we did look into that. It's kind of like comparing apples to oranges, but Skagway did put a local bidder preference in their bid specifications and pushed that through. They also paid a settlement as a result of this. So it's not as clear cut as it sounds. We're back in our situation. Local bidder preference was removed to stay consistent with state law, state procurement code, and with our own standard bid specifications and how we've done past projects. And that is the meat of it. It's not the same as what was going on in Skagway. And as far as the procedural issues, we had one where we asked the Assembly to award the bid prior to issuing the notice of intent to award. That was corrected, and again, as I said earlier, has no impact on how this is being done. So that's really it, unless there's questions. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Giesbrecht. At this point, it's time for Borough Assembly to deliberate, and if you would like to go to our executive session to meet with our attorney, or if you're ready for a motion. Mr. Hoag.
Ms. Mayor, I move that the bid by Tamco be denied. The appeal, by Tamco be denied.
Is there a second?
Second.
What was the motion?
The motion by Mr. Hoag was that the Tamco appeal be denied, or the denial be upheld, I presume. The original denial be upheld.
Okay, thank you. Was it seconded?
It was seconded by Mr. Haverlick, and now it's open for discussion. Any discussion? Okay, then the clerk will call the roll.
I do need to ask for clarification. All right, so we're just going to vote on this motion, and then the Assembly is going to come up with their criteria for denying the appeal? Or should it be part of this motion?
The criteria for denying the appeal should be part of the motion?
Yeah.
Well,
Talk to our attorney.
The criteria would be the original denial. Is that what you're supporting, the city manager's original denial?
They
on
said,
those grounds?
following the decision, number 12 says the Assembly will work with Borough Council to prepare findings of fact and conclusions of law. So as I see the procedure is written, we can vote first and then prepare findings of fact and conclusions of law thereafter.
Okay, I just wanted
I'm looking
clarification.
at
that we're all on
criteria,
the same-
process 12 of the procedure, it seems to me. Jim, Brennan,
Yes.
any disagreement with that? We do the findings of fact and conclusions with your assistance after the vote. Is that okay?
You can do it that way, except that there's, I would either, I think you need to at some point determine who is tasked with writing up the findings of fact and conclusions of law, working with council. Do you want to delegate to that to someone, or do you want it to come back to the body as a whole?
Can we delegate that to the city manager?
I think it would be better for it to be an assembly person.
All right, I'll work on findings of fact and bring them back, I guess, for assembly of final approval, and afterwards, if that's acceptable.
Okay, so would you repeat your motion again,
The
Ben?
motion is to deny the appeal of Tamico, which is denying the borough's manager's protest. I mean, we're listening to Tamico's appeal, and my motion is to deny their appeal and prepare findings of fact, conclusions of law for final approval thereafter.
Okay, any further discussion? Yes, Mr.
Mrs.
Wolfeter.
Mrs. Mayor, my only concern right now is that state procurement statute, where no bidder preference was referred to, whether it be local or Alaskan. This could hold this project up a lot longer if he appeals and then they find that he has a leg to stand on, that there should have been a bidder preference, whether it be Alaskan or local, needs to be in there. Is there any way that we could find that out for sure before we make this vote? Because I'm going to vote against myself approving the denial if this is indeed a fact that we need to look into, because I don't want this to hold up any longer. If anybody can answer that for me.
Well, my opinion is, under the borough code, the borough can, under subsection C, waive the local bidder preference.
I understand that.
And so the issue of whether there should have been Alaska bidder preference specifically spelled out, I would suggest, is moot, since the lowest bidder is an Alaskan company.
Well, for procedure reasons, should it have been in writing, like he refers to? It's if it needed to be in writing before we could have proceeded with this contract or with the opening the bids, then that could hold us up, I'm afraid. I mean, he stated that due to the funding source through the state procurement statute, there needed to be a preference of one form or another, whether it be Alaskan or local. We chose to take local out of it.
Who said there has to be?
Mr. Martinson.
Mr. Brennan, would this be a point for us to go into executive session with you?
If you so chose, I could certainly respond to those kind of questions.
I think.
I would appreciate some input from our attorney.
Mr. Hoag, you have a motion on the floor.
Well, it can be deferred while we go into executive session.
All right, so Nancy, you're making a motion to enter an executive session to consult with legal counsel?
I so move.
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved by Member Strand and seconded by Member Lagadakis to go into executive session with our attorney on this issue.
I need a roll call.
Okay, roll call vote.
John Haberlet.
Yes.
John Hoag.
Sure.
Kurt.
Yes.
Sue.
Yes.
Nancy.
Yes.
Cindy.
Yes.
Mark.
Yes.
Okay, I need everyone to leave.
That means me
Gentlemen,
too.
we'll make other arrangements for your
think it's his only friend.
Oh, hello, who's that?
This is Jim.
Okay, everybody's here. Everybody's down here. Okay, we're out of executive session. Back on the record.
Ms. Mayor?
Mr. Hoag.
I would like to withdraw my motion and make an alternative motion at this time, if that's appropriate.
I'll withdraw my second.
Okay.
Or,
Does that need to be voted on first? Or not?
No, according to
Okay.
the clerk. All right, I move that the Tamaco appeal be denied on the same factual grounds and legal basis as set forth in the borough manager's decision denying Tamaco's bid in protest.
second.
Okay, seconded by Mr. Haverlick. Any discussion? Hearing none, the clerk will call the roll.
John Haverlick,
Yes.
Kurt,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Nancy,
Yes.
Sue,
Yes.
John Hope,
Yes.
Cindy.
Yes.
Okay, that was unanimous then. To deny the appeal. So the next item is to award the North Harbor Reconstruction Project. And I'm ready for a motion. Would someone like to make a motion?
Mrs. Mayor,
Mr. Haverlick.
I'd still like to use your holiness just because it's
Right.
Easter week, but anyway. I would move to award the contract to Western.
I'll second that.
Okay, and could we add the amount of that contract into the motion?
How about if you just amended this per your engineer's recommendation?
Sounds good. Okay, any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, the clerk will call the roll.
Sue,
Yes?
John Haverlick,
Yes.
John Hope,
Yes.
Kurt,
Yes.
Nancy,
Yes.
Cindy,
Yes.
Mark.
Yes.
Okay. So, that is it.
That's it?
That's it?
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank Jim.
So I'll be ringing off now.
Okay, goodbye, Jim.
Bye, everybody.
So that concludes the hearing. Are you going to stay with us, Mark?
Yes.
Okay. Then following along on our agenda, we're at visitors' views related to the agenda. Okay, visitors' views unrelated to the agenda. Board, commission, and committee reports. Okay, there is no consent agenda. So now we are at report of other officers, and the finance committee, or the finance director has a schedule for budget hearings in your packets. Page 12.
Outline of the schedule for the borough, or the budget borough. Excuse me. April 1st was the deadline for department heads to submit their budgets. That's today. I'm still waiting on a few. I'm not going to name names. On April 15th, I hope to submit the proposed budget to the assembly. They must be submitted before May 1st. On Monday, April 22nd, I've scheduled a budget work session with the department heads at noon. And April 26th, which is a Friday, there's a work session with the school at noon, the hospital at 1, and then the community services at 1:30. And then May 6th will be the first reading of the borough budget ordinance. And the deadline to adopt the borough budget is June 15th.
Okay, does that work for everyone? The dates look
Yeah,
okay?
I will have to miss everything from this meeting until the May 6th meeting. My apologies, but I've got pre-commitments, hope to be excused until then.
Okay.
It looks good to me, Mayor, and I won't be at the next meeting, but I should be in town all of May and the first 2 meetings of June, for sure the first meeting of June, so.
Okay, real good. That sounds good then, Jody. I think we can keep that schedule. Okay, the mayor's report. One appointment, or one report to appoint to the ad hoc audit committee. The borough has received the names of, I think it's 9 now, individuals willing to serve on the committee to be chaired by Assembly Member Woolhuter. Those individuals are Joan Kutzer, Mike Bangs, Andy Knight, Frank Nidifer, Dave Somerville, Jason Dugan, Dave Beebe, John Jensen, and Brian Lynch. Hearing no objection. Do you have a suggestion?
I do have a suggestion. When we met and teleconference on Friday, we talked about including an Alaska Native representative, and I have contacted Brenda Louise, who works for PIA and also is the president for Alaska Native Sisterhood. She is interested, and she has a copy of the documents that we were given on Friday. She has not had a chance to respond. I just sent those to her this morning, but I've had personal conversation with her.
Great, thank you. We will add her name then to this list. Any other comments on these appointments?
Is there a page, did you list a person on page 14?
We have her. She's on here
Okay, she's on the
also.
list, okay.
Okay, then that is your committee, Mr. Woolhuter.
Thank you very much.
All righty.
We'll set a date.
Okay, Mr. Eastbrook, the manager's report. Okay.
Thank you, Mrs. Mayor. The police chief search is continuing. As of Thursday-ish, we had over 40 applicants. I spoke with Richard. He said there's usually anywhere from 10 to 15% come in on the very last day, which is tomorrow. So we're looking at maybe somewhere between 40 and 50 applicants. They'll be reviewing those and getting a kind of a list to us, hopefully either the end of this week or the first part of next week. So we'll start getting a little more specifics on the candidates as well as what the next steps are. The library has digitized the Petersburg newspapers from 1913 to 1931. They are now online and searchable for those folks who like old news. We had a second eagle strike of the year, resulted in an outage from Scow Bay north. We have a new procedure for handling the carcasses that should help with some of the issues related to fish and game regulations. There were some concerns about our guys picking up eagles and having them in their possession. You didn't necessarily want to leave the carcasses either, but we've now got that resolved on how we handle that. FERC has agreed to not charge a land use fee for Blind Slough and other hydro projects which are not on federal land. Thanks to our congressional delegation and our federal lobbyists for keeping on this issue, as well as Joe Nelson. This is an issue that was kind of odd. We would get a tax bill for property we own from FERC, and we're required to pay it. So we basically have, it appears that is going to go away. Not a huge dollar amount, but it's something. The Harbor Board and staff performed some simulation efforts for the proposed drive-down dock facility approach. Brian Weldy brought one of the fire trucks out there and to kind of use it to see length and width so we can make sure that the design, the approach and everything will work with some of our users. Harbor's working on 2 salmon mitigation grant proposals for harbor floats. The trawler work float by salvaging some North Harbor transient float, reconfigure it, redeck it into a 40 by 40 foot trawler work float. The grant amount on that one that's available is $50,000 that we're looking for. And then the fish cleaning float, which is a much bigger project. It's a complete replacement of the fish cleaning float that we have today that's too small. That's staged at the end of the South Harbor launch ramp. Stan Malcolm, Alaska Department of Fish and Game, Sport Fish Division, and the Harbor Department are all working on this and providing resources. Grant money available is $250,000. So as we get a little closer, we'll give you more information on that. Public Works is actually, it says getting ready, but they are out doing the street cleaning as we speak. Thank you very much. Clawson Museum retaining wall and the site preparation project is out to bid. The pre-bid scheduled for April 10th with the bid opening on April 19th. And the last thing is working with, and you'll continue to see a stream of emails, but I'm working with Jim Agner and Bruce Westry and department heads as needed, as well as some vendors to kind of evaluate different options that we have on the police and jail facility. I hope to have a formal recommendation of various options to the Assembly by the first meeting in May. That's just a lot dependent on how fast we can get information back from some of these vendors. Have not ruled out. We still have, I've spoken to Wayne Jensen. We may still use him. We may use somebody else. It just a lot depends on, once we get rid of some of the alternatives, what we're left with, do we find, at that point, do we need an architect or not, and what type of architect and what kind of experience? So I want to narrow that down. The goal is to provide very, very specific instructions to whoever we use. We want this building remodeled or this type of building construction of this size, and that's the piece that we don't know yet. So that's it, unless there's questions for me.
Questions? Okay. That brings us to unfinished business. Under the Borough, the general appeal, the Attorney General's office, representing the LBC, has utilized an automatic 30 days extension provision to respond to Juneau's appeal. Since the Borough wants to coordinate with the state, our argument brief will be filed at about the same time as the AG's. Briefs are now due May 6th. There are no future transition items at this point, and under redistricting, we have no new information. I think that's all held up with the U.S. Supreme Court at this point. Under SEPA, there is nothing new with the D. Hill report. Brings us to new business with an ordinance number 2013-5, an ordinance adjusting the fiscal year 2013 budget to address known changes. The Borough Charter requires that all matters relative to the annual budget, adoption, reduction of appropriations, supplemental appropriations, etc., be performed by ordinance. This ordinance provides for the known changes necessary for the current year budget. Yes, Mr.
Mayor?
Yes, Mark.
I move we adopt ordinance 2013-5 in its first reading.
Thank you. Been seconded by John Haverlick. Motion by Mark Jensen. Discussion, Jody, did you want to address this first?
Yes, if you look on page 17, there is one clarification. I need to edit the passenger port dock, Rasmus Inge Bridge. The passenger port dock is completed, and we want to transfer out the funds out of that fund and put them in the Rasmus Inge Bridge project. This is roads money that we got from the federal government. I had $28,101. It's actually $32,854. Is my mistake when writing this last week.
Okay.
And that $28,000 is actually the cash balance already in the Rasmus Inge Bridge project. But and a lot of the other points in this supplemental budget, they've already been approved at one time or another by the council. It's just putting them in ordinance form for charter. And if you have any questions, please ask. I did list that explanation for all of them, hoping that would help everyone understand all these changes.
Anyone have questions? Mr. Hoag?
I would move to amend the motion to pass ordinance 2013-5 by changing the transfer out monetary money from $28,101 to $32,854, if that's the right number.
Thank you.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Mr. Hoag has amended the ordinance number 2013-5 to transfer out of the passenger port dock project to the Rasmus Inge Bridge Fund $32,854 rather than the $28,101 that was listed in the original ordinance. And that has been seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Okay, the clerk will call the roll on the amendment.
John Hoag,
Yes?
Kurt,
Yes.
Cindy,
Yes.
John Haverlick,
Yes.
Mark, Sue,
Yes.
Nancy.
Yes.
Okay, any further discussion on the ordinance as amended? Okay, clerk will call the roll.
Kirk,
Yes.
John Ho,
Yes.
Cindy,
Yes.
John Haverlick,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Sue,
Yes.
and Nancy.
Yes.
Okay, motion carries 7-0. Next is Resolution 2013-10, a resolution authorizing a grant application and acceptance of federal funds for purchase of an ADA-compliant vehicle. The resolution gives consent to the borough manager to apply for and administer grant funds for the purchase of an ADA-compliant vehicle to provide safe and efficient transportation service. The borough's motor pool committee has recommended to budget funds in the fiscal year 2014 budget as matching funds in the amount of $27,925. Do I hear a motion?
I move to adopt the ordinance or the resolution.
Second.
Okay, the motion was made by Member Lagadakis and seconded by Member Strand. Any discussion on the motion?
No, I guess, Mayor, I could just say that I was at the motor pool meeting when we discussed this issue, and it sounds like something that would be very beneficial to help transport people around. So I'm in support of it.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? Will the clerk call the roll, please?
Nancy,
Yes.
Kirk,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
John Haverlick,
Yes.
Cindy,
Yes.
Sue,
Yes.
John Ho.
Yes.
Okay, motion carries 7-0. Item C is authorization to amend the assessor's professional services contract to include assessment functions for areas outside Service Area 1. The borough's contract assessor, Appraisal Company of Alaska, has provided a proposed amended professional services contract to include the cost of beginning assessment work for borough areas outside of Service Area 1. The assessor is requesting the contract to be amended to provide for an additional fee amount of not to exceed $30,000.
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve the $30,000 for the assessment services.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Member Haverlick and seconded by Member Strand to increase the assessor's fee by an amount not to exceed $30,000. Any discussion?
Is this fee, $30,000 additional dollars, is that for the next year? Is that what I get out of this?
Jody?
No, it's for borough, it'll come out of the borough transition costs, our fees. That fund, it's for work that he's starting to do on the borough, which includes on page 29, there's a list of, I can read them all if you would like. There's quite the, research all property with the Borough of Land Management status plats within the new borough boundaries, research all plats within the borough boundaries through 1964, approximately 260 plats, develop an Excel spreadsheet identifying all plats and U.S. surveys by township range and section, print copies of all plats and deeds for each lot within each platted subdivision for ownership and owners' addresses, print property records cards, make the records cards, and provide assistance to Susan Christensen, who is the borough's mapping specialist.
Mark, were you able to hear Jody on that?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so this is work that he's going to be starting on now.
Yes.
So this is for this year. Any other questions? Clerk, call the roll.
Sue,
Yes.
Cindy,
Yes.
John Ho,
Yes.
Nancy,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
John Haverlick,
Yes.
Kurt.
Yes.
Okay, on to communications. There is a notice of state land sale. There are some lots at Frederick Point North. The State of Alaska Department of Natural Resources has issued public notice that 4 lots at Frederick Point North are available for sale by public auction. Sealed bids will be accepted between March 20th and July 10th. For more information, interested parties, interested residents should call the Juneau DNR office at 907-465-3400. Okay, assembly discussion items. Are there any recognitions today? Mr. Hoag.
I would like to recognize the city manager for his extra hours and role in working on the moving target of what can we do for a new police building. I'm aware that he has spent a lot of extra time on this and will continue to do so.
Okay, and thank you, Steve.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Nancy?
I'd like to recognize or give whatever recognition to everybody who uses their turn signals when they want to turn off.
It sounds like that's been an issue. Yes.
You can't believe how many turn signals are broken, and nobody knows the arm signal either, apparently. I'd just like to recognize those who do use their turn signals.
Okay. Any further recognitions? Mr. Haverlick?
So I have three. It's you know, we always hear about so many of the programs that Parks and Rec has gone through, and especially this past weekend. And they offer so many options for our kids, and the library also. It's just amazing, and I really appreciate that kind of support for the people in our town. And on the news today with, I think her name is Joni Johnson, the excellent job that she's doing with the kids in the science projects and getting them all over the state, it's just very impressive.
And the quality of the work
Exactly.
that they're
Yeah,
doing.
and that Tsunami Bowl, she's in
Right.
charge of that, yes. Okay, great. Okay, item B is Kurt.
Item B, thank you. Yes, Mayor. We had like a real informal meeting with the Sea Alaska Heritage Institute to try to figure out what we're going to do about the sea otter issue. And it looks to me that probably one of our best directions to go in is to go to work with the Sea Alaska Heritage Institute and try to get some funding so that they can go into the communities and teach classes on how to, handle the furs after they've been shot, and then what to do with the furs after they've been shot. They had a 3-year program already with the state, but the Senate this year decided to pull their funding after year 1. So they're asking for, well, I asked them if there's anything that we could do for them, and so through a form of a resolution that we can't vote on this time around, but next time around, we'll put our voice behind, encouraging the indigenous people to take more sea otters.
Okay. Do you have a meeting date set yet?
I do not yet, but we
Okay.
should. I'll try to come up with them before we end here.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, then, are we okay on breaks? Okay. At this point, we need to go into executive session to discuss the IBEW contract negotiations.
I so moved. Second.
All in favor? Aye, okay.
Mayor,
Hey,
Yes?
Dave?
I think I will